Hello, Dias Moragus Folklore. You are very welcome to today's episode of Badger Horns, the inaugural episode of Badger Horns, no less. This is a space in which I'd like to discuss mythology, folklore, art and culture, etc. But today we are celebrating Imbolc, or Lála Bríd, and I thought that I would prepare for today by showing you all how to make a Chrysog Bríd, or a Bríd's cross, out of rushes. But first off, let's kickstart things by sort of explaining who Bríd is in the first place. So who is Bríd? Bríd is a prehistoric goddess, and she's common to the Gaelic nations, so that's Scotland, Ireland, and the Isle of Man. But her influence probably stretched further afield to Britain and maybe even Gaul. She's associated with livestock, crafting, healing, poetry, among many other things. She has in her herds two oxen kings, as well as the king of the sheep, Ciaramh, and the king of the boars, Torc Tria. And Torc Tria is the boar that Arthur would later hunt if you're a follower of Welsh mythology. In the ancient Cormac's glossary, Sanus Cormac, it's said that she's a triple goddess, along with two other sisters, both called Bríd, one of whom is the patron of blacksmithing, and the other of whom is a friend to the poets. I think it's important here to remember that poets and satirists held quite a high social rank in medieval Ireland, in the Gaelic world in general. They basically had the ability to make or break the political careers of their peers and countrymen. So I think that she is associated with poetry here shouldn't really be taken too trivially. It's thought by some that she was important enough to be Christianized as Saint Bríd, one of the patron saints of Ireland. Now, this conflation might be Victorian conjecture. There's plenty of scholars arguing about this, but I think either way, it has captured the collective imagination of many people and sort of created a new mythology and a new tradition surrounding both of these figures. To this day, crosses made of straw and rushes are traditionally woven on the 1st of February to celebrate Imbolc, or St. Bríd's feast day. And I think whether Bríd's crosses are a Christian innovation or they date to a Gaelic prehistory, that's for scholars to debate, but I think their place in the rural folklore of the Gaelic world will remain secure well into the 21st century. So with that in mind, let's get on with it. The first thing you need to do is find some rushes, and this really shouldn't be hard. They're quite common in Ireland and Britain. You'll find them near ponds and streams or in marshy areas. You can even find them in ditches. They don't necessarily need an obvious water source. They just like it a little bit damper than usual. If you're a bit further afield or you can't find any, then you can always use wheat stalks, or if you're doing it with the kids, then recycled cardboard could be fun, and that would make it very easy to paint or to glue together. But once you have these rushes, you want to give them a quick wash and then cut them down to size. What you'll be doing is folding them in half, so you want a length that's a little longer than the full size of the cross you're after. Now for the first stage of making the cross, you'll want 4 rushes bent in half ahead of time. This will make it easier. You can bend all of your rushes beforehand, but I like to live dangerously, so I'll be bending most of mine one-handed. So to begin, you're going to take your first stalk as your starting point. You want to leave yourself a nice bit of space near to the bend. And then what you want to do is place another stalk perpendicular to the first one, bent around it. With this new stalk in place, you'll take another stalk, moving around in the same direction, and bend it around the last one. This rotation of 90 degrees will be the main movement that you're doing while we're making the Chrysog, But the fourth rush that you place is quite an important one. Basically, this one's going to keep the others in place. So we're not just going to wrap it around the third reed, we're going to push it through the gap that we left on the first reed as well. And this secures the whole basic shape, so you don't have to worry about it coming apart. You might be able to tell these reeds are a little more woody than I'm used to. I'm blaming the sea air here. Now, if you're ready to move on, your croissant should look a little bit like this. Now, you can spend a little while tightening it up, but don't worry if it's not too neat, because we can always tidy it up again later. So after you've got the initial cross shape down, it's just a case of continuing that pattern of 4 rushes around the cross until you're happy with it. You'll place your first rush by wrapping it round one of the arms that you've already got, and then you'll hold it in place. Now you'll place your next rush, wrapping it round the one that you're already holding, and you'll rotate the cross so that you're now holding the second rush. You always want to be holding the rush that you had just placed, basically. So the first rush is held in place by the second, and the second is held in place by your hand. Now you can place a third rush over the second and rotate your cross again so that you're now holding the third rush. You might be already getting the pattern here. You basically just continue always holding the last rush you placed and always wrapping the next rush around it. Just make sure you continue going in the same direction. And if you get confused, don't worry. Not everyone finds it intuitive. Nothing's set in stone at this stage. Basically, you can take it all apart and come back to it. All you've done is bend rushes in half. Now you can keep going around the cross in this way as many times as you want, adding as many rushes as you want. I tend to think that 4 journeys around the cross is a nice number. It does make for a slightly smaller cross once they've all dried out a little bit and shrunk. But it's up to you how far you go with this, basically. Once you've added as many reeds as you like, what I like to do is just give everything a little bit of a tidy. So basically pushing all the rows towards the center, just making sure everything's even and nothing is out of place. You want to be careful during this stage that you aren't letting it fall apart. Basically, you might find that you're stuck holding the last arm that you placed. That's just something to bear in mind. It doesn't matter if that arm is a little looser than the rest of them, because the next step is basically tying off the arms. Basically, what you're going to do here is take the last arm that you did and tie it together at the end. Give it a little squeeze to make sure it's nice and tight and everything's in place, and then you can continue doing the other 3 arms. Now, all you need to do to complete your croissant is to clip off the ends of the rushes. You don't need to trim the ends, but it just gives it a nice, uniform, tidy appearance. And there you have it. You've finished your croissant. Don't worry too much if yours isn't so tidy. You can see that mine isn't very neat. Like I say, the rushes that I had were a little stiff and I wasn't used to working with them like that. But it's not really about the appearance, it's more about the act of creation and creativity, to be honest. Now, there is a variant of this made with only 3 arms. I know some people probably find the cross is a little overtly Christian, but either way, I would suggest making the 4 arms cross first as a practice round. To make one with 3 arms, we're going to do exactly the same thing as we did before, but we're just going to begin with 3 rushes. This probably looks a bit easier as you've less to hold on to, but you also have to keep an eye on the angles and where your rushes are all at. With forearms, the right angles tend to keep the brushes in place to some extent. When there's only three, they tend to sort of slip over each other and deform the shape a little bit easier. It's not a nightmare, but it's just something to watch out for. So there's lots of folklore surrounding Bríd and Bríd's cross. Some people say that if you put the cross over the doorway of your home, it will protect your home from fire. The story I remember hearing as a kid was how Bríd was summoned to the bedside of a dying pagan king, and she was summoned by some concerned Christian subjects of his. And she sat by his bedside and she pulled some of the thatching down from the roof and she began to weave a cross out of the thatching. And of course, the king is confused by this and he asks her what on earth she is doing. And she explains what the cross is and what the cross means to her. And the king ends up converting on his deathbed from being a pagan to a Christian. And he ends up being baptized, so he gains salvation. So I guess that's a win for Bríd the saint, as opposed to Bríd the goddess. But I don't know who's keeping score. There's absolutely loads that I could talk about with Bríd the saint and Bríd the goddess, but that could fill a video all of its own, so I think we'll leave it there for today. And there we go. A nice little project to do with the kids, or perhaps a mindfulness exercise to complete on this Imbolc or Lá le Bríde. And there's a little bit of folklore behind it as well. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for the next episode, whatever that may be about. I have a few ideas in the pipeline, but we'll see what the future holds. But above all else, I hope that you and yours are staying safe. Slán go fóill a chairde. Goodbye for now.